will record this presentation. I will be sending out the recorded presentation following today, and this presentation is something that you can share with your partners. It may be helpful to share at like a coalition meeting that you have, for example, to get everyone really on the same page about what Safe Routes to Parks is if they weren't able to make today. All right. I don't know what happened. Let's see. All right, so today we plan on just doing some introductions, very brief introductions, so we just know who's on the call. We'll go through a little brief history about Safe Routes to Parks, talk about the action framework. We're going to break the framework into individual stages and have time for questions after each one. Also a time to share out some maybe lessons learned or some examples that you seen around similar frameworks or just work around community change. And then we'll have time for questions hopefully at the end if you maybe had some additional questions come up throughout the presentation, and then we'll go ahead and close out for today. So if we can start with everyone, just jump in as you can, sharing your name, your community, and the role or title that you have. So I will start off. I'm Danielle Sherman. I'm the Healthy Parks and Places Manager with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and I'm your main contact for the Safe Routes to Parks Activating Communities program.
Good morning, everyone. This is Claudia Corchado from Cultiva la Salud in Merced County, and I am the program manager for Cultiva la Salud.
Thanks, Claudia.
Okay, this is Allison Redens from Health by Design in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm the pedestrian and bicycle program manager.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marlene Vasquez. I'm currently the coordinator of community-driven initiatives at Can Do Houston.
Next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy. I'm with the Environmental Health Coalition, and my title here at the EHC is the National City Policy Advocate.
Can someone put yourself on mute? There's a lot of background noise. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Hey, I'm Jonathan Crane in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm the fleet rebalancer with Zip Bike Share.
Great, Jonathan. Anyone else?
Hey, this is Marisa Jones, Healthy Community Senior Manager at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. And there are a couple people typing in on the chat. Rachel Chase, Health and All Policies Coordinator with Florida Department of Health, partner with Safe and Sound in Hillsborough, Tampa, Florida. Clay with Zip in Birmingham.
This is James Rath from Capital Roots. I'm the Healthy Communities Coordinator here over in Troy, New York.
Great.
Hi, this is Julie McCann with Rev Birmingham. I'm the Director of Communications for Rev.
Nice. Olivia, did you ever introduce yourself? Okay, so if there's anyone else on the call, feel free to chat in. I know some don't have access or might be in a noisy area. Oh yes, Olivia does not have her mic. Feel free to chat in your community, Olivia, and what's your role, and we'll share it out with the group. So let's get started. So next on the agenda A little bit about the Safe Routes to Parks history, and most of you have heard this on the group orientation, but for those that weren't a part of that call, the Safe Routes to Parks initiative was developed through a grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. They provided it to the National Recreation and Parks Association to really support the Surgeon General's call to action on walking and walkability. The national partnership was invited by the National Recreation and Parks Association to work together with the Trust for Public Land and the American Planning Association to create the Safe Routes to Parks Action Framework, which you see on the screen right now. And this is really what is serving as a foundation for the Safe Routes to Parks activating communities work that we're doing. So through this program, we will be utilizing this framework that we're going to learn more about today as a tool in supporting efforts to improve utilization of parks in your communities through safe and equitable access to parks. And the program is made possible through the funding of the JPB Foundation. All right, so before we get into each stage, just figured it would be nice to see the framework overall. This framework was developed for park agencies, and we are now trying to incorporate it into more community-based organizations like yourselves. So there will be some adjustments that you'll notice if you've looked at the action framework before. So overall, this 5 stages. Engage works as a standalone, but it's really according to this framework and according to the initiative, is embedded throughout each stage of the framework. And so engagement is just that, having a partner coalition with various organizations like governmental agencies, businesses, hospitals, as well as community or neighborhood associations that have community members. And then this, if we look at assessment, now that is really where you're identifying your assets and your barriers to park access. And then that information is used to help you define your park Safe Routes to Parks priorities in the planning stage and helps you to develop your action plan. From that, you're able to start to implement some activities, whether it's like the early action efforts that you're going to be doing as a part of the initiative, or if it's like other initiatives or other things of implementation that you're working on within this stage. Then from there, you'll go on to sustainability, trying to see how you're going to keep the work going, whether it's developing more formal agreements with the partner organizations that are within the coalition or beyond, looking at, measuring impact, looking at how you're going to sustain the initiative or the work financially moving forward. So that's just the framework in a nutshell. And so now we're going to go into each section individually. And a reminder that you will have an opportunity to ask questions after each section, as well as share out any of your lessons learned so far related to any of them, maybe around engagement or assessment. And yes, so it can be very interactive. So for the first stage, that's engage, and this is where we're really partnering with community organizations and community members during all stages of the process. So this is the first thing that we really start at is really looking at developing a coalition, if you haven't already done so, or engaging with an existing coalition of community partners. This can include, like I said before, government agencies, community-based organizations, elected officials, neighborhood associations, businesses, and the organization should really represent or include those from underrepresented or high-need populations. Because again, this initiative is really about creating safe and equitable access. Equity is a big component of that, which is providing access to resources to those that are most in need of those resources. Also related to engagement is community collaboration. So outside of the coalition, you will also engage other community members that live within the neighborhood that you are focusing on for this initiative and beyond. And it's very important to ensure that the community members are representative, that live within the neighborhood that you are working on in terms of safe routes to parks. Also, in terms of promoting your efforts and really building community advocates and really increasing community participation and engagement, is to develop a marketing and communications plan to do that. And examples of that, can include, like, whether it's flyers or, billboard campaigns, social media blasts, or even having community events at the park where you work with neighborhood organizations to get folks out and developing relationships, and also getting input on the work that you're doing. And just so you know, before this, we had Safe Routes to Park pilot studies, or pilot sites where we had like group calls each month, and they didn't receive any funding like you all, but it really helped us to gather and learn a little bit more about Safe Routes to Parks. And so we do have some examples to share through each one of these stages. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you all. So with in terms of developing a partner coalition, one of the Safe Routes to Park sites, pilot sites, Vigo County in Indiana, they were led by the Terry, and I might be saying this incorrectly, Terry Hott Parks and Rec Department. And I know that Allison and Kim at Health by Design, who's actually in Indiana, have worked with them through this as well. And so they really worked on identifying potential partner coalition team member organizations and individuals, and then they obtained their contact information and then prepared and distributed introductory letters that they would send to those individuals and organizations, and then collected the responses to really determine who the partner coalition members were going to be. And then they selected a meeting location to host they had monthly partner coalition team meetings. They also created a Facebook page to share out information between folks of the partner coalition. So that's just an idea of a way to develop a coalition if you don't already have one. Someone said I'm cutting off. Is that true? Are you having a hard time hearing me? Is this better?
I think you sound okay, Danielle.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, and then we also had really good feedback about the necessity of partner coalitions. So Dayton, Ohio, they mentioned the key to this plan, and this is a direct quote from both of these organizations or communities. The key to this plan working well was to include a wide range of partners and having the technical expertise available on the team. I think trying to take on a project like this without professional design help and those involved with youth and transit would have made this project a lot more difficult. And then Athens, Georgia, this was something that they were sharing out to others that were planning on using this framework. They said, be open to hearing what your community says. You may do site assessments and think you know what communities need or want, but when you gather folks together, you may hear a totally different message than what you were expecting. So don't go into telling them what you're going to do. Ask what their thoughts are on what they'd like to see happen. And that's just the essence of authentic community engagement, is to make sure that you are, even though it comes from a good place of wanting to just go ahead and move forward with things, it's very important to make sure that those that will be using what you are putting in, the services or infrastructure, is of liking, of interest to those that actually live in the community. And so that was a really important this tidbit to think about when you're engaging the community. All right, and so around technical assistance for engagement, these are some ways that you can engage us around technical assistance around engagement. This is not a comprehensive list. Just wanted to share some ideas. Feel free to share your own ideas as we're moving through the process. So education on authentic community engagement, co-facilitate community engagement meetings, and assisting with the development of a marketing and communications plan to promote efforts and build advocates. And so throughout this this year as well, we will be developing some resources related to these various stages. And we'll make them known to you all, of course, first, and also be able to share them publicly. All right, are there any questions now about engagement? All right, no questions about engagement. I will call on Claudia from Cultiva La Salud in Merced County and see if she can share a little bit about the process of community engagement for her community, and why, and like, how have you seen it be, how has it been beneficial?
Yes, hi everyone, good morning. So how has it been beneficial? I have to say, we wouldn't be successful in this work if it wasn't for community engagement, right? So the importance of including residents, especially in a project like a park, to us is really important because, for example, the community that we're working in, it's a little small town called Panada. Like I mentioned before, you pass it on the way to Yosemite, but people really don't even recognize that it's like a little town where people live. There's almost 5,000 people that live there. But it's about 98% Latino community, primarily all farm workers. And so the majority of them do come from Mexico. And in Mexico, like a park to them was really the heart of every community. That's where they socialize. That's where they de-stress. That is where music is happening, where art is happening. And so it was really a place for them to be healthy, not just physically, but mentally. And when we assume that we know what our residents want, it's really not true, because they're the ones that live there. They're the ones that should be designing the place that they're going to be leaving behind for their children, right? Like, I don't live in Planada. It's only 7 miles away, but I get to drive back to Merced. So community inclusion, especially in a project like a park, to us was really, really important. And let me just give you another really quick example about the importance of community engagement. There was a project that was working around bringing a truck that would drive around with fruits and vegetables. And so the group that was organizing this truck to drive around with fruits and vegetables had a focus group. And so, the whole thing was like, we're going to have this truck. You can pick up your kids right after school on Wednesday and then pick up healthy fruits and vegetables. It was a great intent. And so the residents are looking around and they're like, that's not going to work. And so I was even questioning, that's not a good idea. Is it not a good idea? Do you not like the idea? And then one of them finally spoke up and said, it's a great idea. We need access to healthy food, but it can't be on Wednesday because we don't get paid till Friday. So it would be pointless to put it there on Wednesday. They put it there on Wednesday anyway, and obviously it did not succeed. This is why they don't succeed, right? But it's those kind of things that you have a project, you won't succeed without the community really driving your work. And then, of course, I'm privileged, and I thank my mother every day. It's very important to have someone who speaks the language and who truly respects the culture, who truly respects, the folks that you're working with.
Love that. Thank you, Claudia. Does anyone have questions or any comments about what Claudia said? Or just questions about engagement overall before we move forward? And feel free to chat in the chat box. And just to know, while you might be thinking, is that with engagement, like all the other phases, everyone on this call and everyone across the country, everyone is at a different stage. So we're not expecting everyone to be like, having community members totally leading the initiative, even though that really is great to have a community that's leading the initiative and making the decisions, but moving beyond just input to more interactions towards eventually having community members leading initiatives and you just supporting and like supporting through convenings is where we want to push. So every stage, we're at different different stages or different places of each stage, but just continuously moving along the continuum. And in each phase is what we would hope for each of the communities on this call. Any other questions? All right. And you have time at the end again that you can ask questions. So next we have assessment. All right, so with assessment, this is where we really understand community priorities based on data and community input. First would be identifying a park or parks to focus on for your Safe Routes to Parks efforts. That has already been done. And really that should be based on the data that you are collecting in this stage. So if you think back and you're like, oh, maybe I just selected this park and we haven't really received any input from community members, just maybe revisit that as you're going throughout this phase. Also, something related to assessment is completing a data and mapping analysis of the routes to parks and surrounding neighborhoods. This will help to really identify any of the assets and barriers to park access. It also includes analysis of your current financial and staffing resources, because we know that this is beyond just what we would, things that we want. We also need to understand how the landscape of the organization is set up, or organizations that are working together to create this change. Also, it's critical to have various audits done, so in-person walkability and accessibility audits with the community and community partners along the routes to parks, so that you can also identify assets and barriers to park access as well as safety. And when we think about engagement, since engagement is a part of each phase, engagement in terms of assessment, that's working with the coalition and individual partners to analyze the data and conduct audits and collecting the community surveys and leading the community meetings and events. Community engagement, really that's, so beyond the coalition, like I said, you will also engage with other community members. So holding a meeting or a community event where you can gather input and data so you can understand more of the barriers and assets and perceived gaps. And this also includes not just surveying, which is like more of the quantitative. I mean, it could include qualitative information, but also having conversations with folks at these community events, because being able to capture lived experiences is very key, and you can tend to get it more when you have conversations and more interviews than maybe necessarily someone writing it down in a survey. All right, so in terms of analysis of the route to park and surrounding neighborhoods, some things are, like I just mentioned, audits, walkability or accessibility audits. These can include photos. There's something called Photo Voice that you may have heard about, where it's like doing almost like an audit and taking photos. So that's also another way that you can engage youth. And it makes it a little bit more interesting. And so the way they could capture pictures of assets as well as the barriers to park access. And then it's helpful that if you write something down in an audit and you don't remember later, you might have some photos that you can lean on to jog your memory. Also, it's helpful to connect with your local streets and transportation agencies to gather crash data. Also, information from their bike and ped master plan. A lot of times they have a lot of statistics in those plans that can be useful to your assessment. Also, GIS data on transit routes or sidewalk locations, and then law enforcement for crime data around the neighborhood. There's also something, organization called Community Commons that you may have heard of. They offer a free mapping resource to you if GIS is not easily accessible. And then also there is something called SOPARK, which is System for observing play and recreation in communities. That's SOPARC, and that's park observation. So it's a validated direct observation tool for assessing park and recreation areas. And for this initiative, it's really good because it focuses on accessibility and usability as well. And it's through active living research. And if you Google SOPARC or active living research, and you can put in SOPARC there, you can find various tutorials on it, a user guide, and a place where you can go to download the app. So that's just some ways that you can look at analysis of the park routes and neighboring community. Also, in terms of assessment as a means of engaging community, mapping is really useful for seeing areas of need and making large data easy to interpret. It can aid in getting the right advocates on board. It can determine messages, help you to decide how to move forward. And it's most effective, obviously, when you involve the community. Also, collaborative walk audits, that's an example of this, and it allows you to get information that you wouldn't get through other sources. For example, like if there was an unofficial path that everyone took to the park, you would observe that through a walk audit. If there were, what are some personal concerns that folks may have as they're taking the audit, walking the audit? How the community really wants to use the park. So it really allows people to see what are the priorities within the community, and for the community to be more invested because they are part of the entire process. Also helpful to engage people who are not using the park by connecting with local neighborhood organizations. So one of the goals of this initiative is not only to work with those that already access it or, like would access it more than others, is also to engage others who really don't currently use it at all, so that you can potentially get those folks also to become park users. Also, youth engagement is also a means of engaging the community and a very key part. I remember through a lot of your applications that you mentioned that a large percentage of your population were youth. So involving youth is very key. And Marisa shared with me one of the examples when she was working on a mapping project with youth about personal safety and traffic on routes from schools to recreation centers and parks. By working with high school students. And through this, students developed leadership skills since the students were able to present their findings to the county council. So as we know, a lot of folks, as adults really like to hear from youth. So that in itself, creates more interest from elected officials. It's just a very captivating audience. Also, you're getting almost automatic buy-in from your youth because they have already put their stamp of approval on what they would like to see. So just another way to engage the community through youth engagement. All right, and these are some ways you can engage us with for some technical assistance around assessment. So this is some of the things that we are able to help with. And again, the list is endless. Whatever you are in need of, we will work with providing it for you or putting you in the right direction. So we can assist with any in-person walkability or accessibility audits, or train your staff to conduct the walk audits. We can assist with data collection in terms of assessing the baseline to identify assets and barriers. And we can also develop a one-pager of those assets and barriers to park access. We can also assist with conducting a policy assessment or a scan around like complete streets, Vision Zero, policing, maintenance, and zoning, which will help us to really identify policy changes that really support safe routes to parks. And then conducting pathways to influence research on local decision makers. So if we're trying to influence some decision makers to get on board, we can help to kind of figure out what is the route that we need to take in terms of messaging to really reach them. All right, are there any questions for assessment?
Hi, Danielle. This is
Hey.
Allison
Hi,
Redet.
Allison.
Hey, I had one quick question about assessment and kind of that data analysis piece. Because we have already done some key crash analysis and we have done walk audits in those high crash areas in Indianapolis, we
Yeah.
are really kind of looking at doing data analysis around where our key parks are within those high crash zones and where can we work on connectivity as a whole, as a system. So does that still work as that assessment piece?
Yeah, yes. Okay, so you were like cutting out for me. So you were basically saying that you've done some assessment already and that you are now looking to do that within the high crash areas around the parks that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that counts as that type of assessment that you're looking for.
Oh yeah, around crime data, yeah. And you can expand it like to other, like even crime data. Oh, you said crash data, yeah. Crime data. If you want to do park observations or a walk audit, just to flesh it out more. But yes, that is in line with the assessment stage.
Yeah, just clarifying.
Hey, this is Marisa. I'll just add to that too that as Danielle pointed out, people are at different stages with this. So we would just encourage you to include the assessment or the engagement, include that in your plan.
Yes.
You don't necessarily need to do it again. It's great to build upon it, but just making sure that you include it in your plan so that as you're working to move this forward, or if you're engaging new partners or using this to try to get new funding, like you're building upon that's included to show a more comprehensive vision of everything you've done to inform the development of this plan.
Of the plan, right.
Great. Yeah, I was just curious. I know ours is system-wide as opposed to focusing on one park. And so, yeah.
Yes, that's perfect. And we will be sharing the action plan template with you all, hopefully within the next few weeks. It'll definitely be by the end of May, but it should be way before then. And it will walk you through some of the guidance for each stage, and that is included for definitely sharing out what you're learning from the assessment within the plan itself.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
Danielle, quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So some of our counties are going through our general plan updates.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have a couple of sample policies that are really specific around parks and the sustainability of parks. Because in our county, I don't know if this is happening everywhere else, but like our Parks and Recs department is the first one to get cut when it comes to budget.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have some sample policies that you can share?
Yeah, and any particular, just around park and rec?
Well, around parks, but of course around health, right? We want health in all policies, but really in investing in parks and the maintenance of parks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Marisa, feel free to jump in here, and I will also write it down to follow up.
Yeah, Claudia, I would say two things. One, I would say you are in a unique position. Have you all connected with public health advocates on their parks work at all? I think they were doing some work in Merced.
Way in the past. Maybe I need to reconnect, huh?
Okay, and Danielle and I would be happy to reconnect you. Kanat Tibet is the main person there, but they've done a lot of work on California-specific incorporation of complete park policies into general plans. But if that's also something other folks are interested in, that's something Danielle and I can dig a little bit more into. But we can certainly make that connection for you with the California-based folks and send over some ideas of policies or language that could go into a general plan to be supportive of these efforts.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Any ideas that have popped in your mind about assessment that you might think about doing that you would want to share with other folks? Any lessons learned about assessment overall outside of even safe routes to parks? That would be helpful for sharing. All right. Next is plan. All right, so with plan, we are in the phase of really developing priority areas, setting goals and setting actions, and really helping to integrate them into other plans and policies within the agency and other partner agencies. And so for this is really about defining your Safe Routes to Parks priority areas from the assessment that you've done previously, and creating an action plan with specific goals and actions based on the data and community feedback that you've gathered. Also including implementation strategies and funding mechanisms. And so again, like I mentioned, you will have a template that would really guide you in terms of what we would like included in that action plan. We will also send out an action table, which I might have mentioned on the call with some of you during our individual orientation calls, about like something that you can do kind of before the whole plan is fully developed, which really looks at like the priorities that came to the top and what actions you're going to take towards that. What's the timeline of that? Who's the lead agency or group that's going to be over that? And what's the priority? So we'll send that out. It might be before, it might be around the same time as the action plan, but it will be something that we would like to be included as an attachment to the action plan. Also, it's where we really incorporate Safe Routes to Parks priorities into other plans, like we just mentioned with Claudia, that would enhance efforts around like the park master plans, comprehensive plans, transportation plans, health plans, and then also identifying policy changes that would really promote safe routes to parks, whether it's around policing or design guidelines or zoning. And then in terms of engagement around planning, just making sure that the community, the coalition is involved in deciding the top priorities with, in terms of, and also incorporating what you're finding, those priority areas into your organizations and partner organizations' plans and policies. And even before doing this, like getting together, with the assessment, or it could be before, however you choose, but making sure to gather the community to look at, what are the priority areas. So you could do a community meeting where you bring folks together and share out, this is the data that we found, and in some way have some organized way of, showing them the areas that you see and maybe using them to help you determine what are the things that are of priority to them. But definitely incorporating community members as well as your partner organizations as you are determining what are the priority areas. All right. So some examples, like I mentioned, the Safe Routes to Park pilot sites. Around defining Safe Routes to Parks priority areas, Athens, Georgia, they, based upon the need to provide patrons safer and easier access to one of their community centers, they are now underway with the construction of a paved path / walkway. It should be available or completed, I should say, by fall. And it will now make it an official route, which was previously a well-worn trail by foot. So they were able to do some observations and other data collection and noted that 100 people access or use that unofficial trail per day and more during the summer. And so that's how they were able to decide that's where they wanted to focus some of their efforts on. They also, in terms of engagement, they also held community engagement sessions to map out where barriers were with the community members and determine why those were barriers to community members. And something that came up was that they really found that a lot, in terms of accessibility, a lot of the issue was around a sense of crime. Then in terms of incorporating Safe Routes to Parks priorities into other plans, Dayton, Ohio, they rolled their Safe Routes to Parks plan into their new Parks Master Plan. And they're also planning on using it as a model or template for others in the community to utilize. And this process really helped them to solidify their working relationships with the organizations that were in their coalitions. For moving forward. And then also it has become an agency-wide initiative to really ensure that barriers are removed to all parks in their system. All right, so here again are some examples of ways you can engage us in technical assistance, so we can engage with you all. Co-facilitating a planning meeting to create a preliminary action table. Like I mentioned, assisting with identifying policy changes to promote safe routes to parks based on a policy assessment scan that I mentioned in the assessment phase, and then co-facilitating a planning meeting to really incorporate safe routes to parks priorities into other plans, for example, park master plans or transportation or other health plans. All right, are there any questions about planning? Any lessons learned from any planning that you've done previously on other initiatives? Or ahas or things that we should, keep on our brain as we're working on planning? All right. Next is implementation. And this is the boots to the ground. It's putting your plans into action and ensuring that those actions are based on best practices in engineering, design, and programming. So related to engineering and design, we really want you to focus on working with partners to implement improvements to routes leading to the park based on these elements. So route to park design, whether there are, you're focusing on planting or maintaining the trees or plants, or focusing on the design of the entrances and borders to increase perceptions of accessibility. Also, route to park amenities, so building and maintaining and replacing park amenities that are desired by the community, such as trails or bike paths through the park that connects park entrances or exits, or drinking fountains along that park route, as well as bike parking. And that parking can be like bike racks within the park as well. Street design, that is focused on upgrading and designing streets to promote safety for all users, whether it's pedestrians, bicycles, or rollers, those that are in wheelchairs. Also, this is through focusing on a marked crossing or traffic calming measures, sidewalks and bike lanes, and signs. Also, ADA compliance. This is focused on building and maintaining and replacing park, like safe routes to park facilities that really are compliant with the ADA standards, American Disabilities Association, I think, or Act, including sidewalks, trails, and road crossings into and through the park. Also, signage and wayfinding. So this is placing signs or other wayfinding systems in the neighborhood to really guide and attract people to the park. I know some of you are focusing on that, getting folks like just aware that these parks do exist and providing more clarity for all users around the parks that are around the neighborhood. Also, maintenance. So developing maintenance practices to really keep the route of the park safe from hazards and free from graffiti or trash or overgrown plants as well. And then connectivity, which focuses on identifying opportunities to increase connections to, from, and through the park to the neighborhood and other community destinations. And that also includes like formalizing social trails is something related to this that can also be worked on within this initiative. This is a pretty comprehensive or robust example, but New Bedford in Massachusetts, they improved and repaired some of their existing light fixtures. They also identified that a fence within the park was really unnecessary and needed to be removed. So they removed the fence, and so it was really prohibiting the individuals from getting into the park, and has now been removed, and it's been easier to enter. So that was a great accomplishment. And I know one of you all on the call, that is one of the issues for you all as well, is having a park that's within a fence and just not having access beyond a certain time. So That's one example. They will also be fixing some of their cracked sidewalks and broken wheelchair crosswalks leading to the park this summer. And they're having a pop-up event in May to install a temporary crosswalk and parklet to bring more awareness to the park. And they will be actually involving neighboring elementary schools to help with that as well. And I know I shared with Health by Design, there was an initiative in Columbus, Indiana, where they are actually using the help of fifth graders to install a temporary traffic calming measure. So another way of getting youth involved in the efforts. They are also going to be conducting on-site surveys for all the attendees to get feedback about the temporary installations. And it's, just something to know. It's really important to get feedback. You already will have feedback from the assessment that you could, compare it to, but also making sure that you get feedback about the installation or noticing the change, measuring that change once you put in that installation, so that you'll know whether or not it's cost effective or if it's even needed, if it's a permanent change that you would want to create. Okay, and also with Implement, there's programming that is within this area. And I know we mentioned before that, we're really focused on the route to the park, but something that you all could support are programs that are at the park that are held by neighborhood organizations to encourage residents to walk to the park and engage in physical activity at the park. So that is something that can be focused on. Also, personal safety, cultivating relationships with law enforcement to improve safety measures within and near the park. Focusing on these relationships, you're really focusing also on building the policies and programs that will build trust and increase safety for those that are within the community, especially those communities of color that often have issues sometimes with law enforcement. Also, making physical improvements to the built environment that really discourage violence, and that can be done through CPTED, which is Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, and that is really focused on various principles like lighting. I'm drawing a blank as I said it. It's focused on lighting, maintenance, and making sure there's eyes on certain parts of the park that make it more attractive to go to the park and for folks to feel safe in. Also addressing street harassment issues in parks and streets through public campaigns. And then in terms of engagement for implementation, like all the other stages, just involving partners throughout. They can be involved in actually installing or constructing the new features or maintenance or activating the park. And so you've heard some examples of how youth have been involved in, pop-up events and temporary crosswalks and so forth. So those are just some ways to engage community members within implementation. And then also empowering community residents to assist in other activities around the park. So like adopt a park maintenance groups, community park watches, which will help with personal safety, and then also community-led physical activity groups to the park. And just for something also to share is with CPTED, you can also, something that you can use your funds on as well, related to improving lighting, is also moving utility boxes and poles. That's something that's also allowed through this initiative that's along the route. And then also a programming piece is Philadelphia. This was not one of the pilot sites, but Philadelphia, they have Parks on Taps. And so it's a moving beer garden and food truck. And what they did was they went around to lesser known parks to really show the potential in them and activate those parks. So that could be something that, if that were something in your area or that you wanted to work with, help support another organization, it would be a great time for going in and collecting input from the community members that are outside of your coalition about what they would like to see. So just another way of engaging the community. All right, and these are ways to that we can engage with you all on technical assistance for implementation. For example, co-facilitating a meeting with law enforcement to discuss their policies and programs to build trust and increase safety. Also assisting with setting up a pop-up tactical urbanism event, like we mentioned previously about the pop-up crosswalk. And then educating on the crime prevention through environmental design techniques as well as shared use. Working with your team to develop an engaging and productive green and cleanup day as well. And then assisting with finding an engineering firm to conduct studies and drafting local policies. All right, some time for questions around implementation. Any questions or suggestions, any ideas of ways that folks are already thinking how to, or what you might be doing for an early implementation activity? No? No questions? All right, so we'll go ahead and finish up with the last stage before we'll have some just general questions. All right, and is Gilberto on the phone? No, I don't see him. Okay, because he works with Urban Peace Institute, and they've done a lot of work on connecting community with law enforcement, or learning how to build trust, and just collaborate with law enforcement. And so that may be something that we're looking into doing a peer-to-peer learning session on, where he could share out a little bit more about what they've done with Urban Peace around that initiative, and that is an opportunity that we're planning on doing going forward, in terms of maybe occasionally, and this would be helpful to put in the chat if you are interested in having the peer opportunities like once a month, where it would be a chance for you all to learn about a particular topic that is of importance to everyone, or even just to share out, just take some time really to share out any ideas that you may have, or just some brainstorming where it's less formal. But we are thinking about doing that one on community and law enforcement might be the first one, and then maybe about community engagement. So if there's some other topics that you would be interested in around any of this information we shared, or just around safe routes to parks, please put them in the chat, and that will help us to determine next steps in terms of creating that peer-to-peer collaboration time. All right. So,
Danielle, can I just add one thing? This is Marisa. So,
yes.
That was one of the main things that came out of our pilot site project last year. As Danielle mentioned, a lot of these examples are from our pilot sites, and the pilot sites ranked the peer-to-peer learning as one of the most valuable pieces of being part of the pilot site cohort. And so we wanted to build in some more concerted time for that. So encourage you all to take advantage of that, since it was so helpful for your predecessors.
Yes, thank you. All right, so let's look at sustainability. So this is the final stage. It carries a lot of weight, and often sometimes it is kind of left to the wayside. Beyond this initiative, past this year, we really want these efforts to continue and building greater momentum than they started off with. So this really helps to ensure that efforts are continued, and that they are also positively received from the community. So some ways to work within sustainability is to develop a sustainable financing model, which will help you to see whether you want to redirect some existing resources or identify new funding streams. Also incorporating safe routes to parks action items into park and recreation and partner agency planning and policy is also helpful to kind of keep all your efforts going. And then measuring the impact of the changes that you've made, even just especially from the early improvement action that you that you're going to be doing. That just a reminder, making sure that you have the baseline data from assessment, but then you're also going to check in again to see what that change looked like from the action that you did for the early improvement. And then also engage in terms of like engagement and partner coalitions. You really want to look at developing formal agreements with partners because this will really keep it alive. So if you have a formal agreement and then the organization is focusing on a new strategic plan, at least they have that agreement to see what they signed up for and ways to build it in. It just really keeps everyone like on task and on target. Sometimes having an agreement doesn't do that, but it's more chance of that happening with an agreement than without an agreement. Also, formalizing how you're going to continue on with community engagement as an ongoing process. So having your coalition, it could be something that you continue that coalition and you build on to it in terms of other active transportation efforts as well. But we definitely want to see how will this continue, that when October comes, it's not like, okay, this coalition is over, but how could it like grow if you don't already have one that works in this way? How could it grow even further to work on other efforts of the community? All right, and then we have just a few examples. So Athens, Georgia, one of the pilot sites, they said that their participation in the pilot program assisted them with attaining the community development block grant funding through HUD for path improvements. And then the Recreation and Park Commission for the parish of East Baton Rouge, because of the work of the Safe Routes to Parks pilot study, as a pilot site, they added $8,000 to their regular operating budget, specifically for Safe Routes to Parks projects. So that's just something that we can see that like the momentum that you're going to be building through these initiatives, bringing community folks together, defining the priorities, and then putting together a plan and starting to work on some implementation, like, early implementation activities really can help other agencies see, oh, wow, this is something that is of need. And you can sometimes see where you're, you might get additional funds within a certain line item to work on certain initiatives. And then with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they developed a Friends of for their park. And so it was called Friends of August Wilson Park. That's their park, which they are working on right now, but it will be made up of elected officials and partners to continue the work they started while being in the pilot site. And so it's almost like a coalition for the park that will work on maintenance, looking at, how to continue to grow the park, programming. So that might be something that you might want to put into place, a Friends of your park as a part of your sustainability, or a sustainability recommendation as a part of the action plan. All right, and these are ways to really that we can engage with each other on sustainability. So co-facilitating a planning meeting to incorporate Safe Routes to Park actions into other planning and policies. Assisting with data collection, measuring the impact of your early improvement action. Developing language for a formal agreement with partners. For example, shared use or integration of community planning efforts. And then assisting with the development of a sustainable financial model. All examples of ways we can work together. And there's plenty more. And so this is now some time for any questions related to sustainability or any examples that you've seen that were useful or lessons learned around maybe sustainability that initiatives or efforts that you've done in other projects. You're all quiet today. All right. All right, so this is just a time for overall. We have about a little less than 15 minutes about 13 minutes left, and we don't have to take the whole time if it's not needed, but wanted to make sure that you all had a space to share out, ask questions, brainstorm together, whether it's any real life examples of these stages that may be helpful to your efforts. Are there any lessons learned from your initial Safe Routes to Park efforts, maybe around the work you've done around engagement or assessment thus far? Any ahas or ideas that you've generated from today's training on working on these stages? Wow, I guess I did a good job with sharing out. No questions? All right. Well, if you can take some time, just 1 minute, to please share in the chat box a plus, like what was helpful for today's or during today's call, and then also a minus, what is something that we can improve on. So content, delivery, the format, just sharing that out in the chat box would be helpful. And you can also just chat it to me, or you could chat it to everyone. But that information will help us as we get our equity training that will be put together for, I think, the first week in June. Oh, and also a reminder to there are a few folks that I'm still waiting on the 2 to 3 sentences about the program, about your program, as well as there might be, I think, one organization that wanted to send an actual photo instead of the like a map of the park system. If you could send that to me by tomorrow, the end of tomorrow, because we're going to be putting that on the webpage, and so that we can go ahead and share that out with partners, and that so you all have that webpage as well that you can use to share out with folks about the project. And it will list your organizations. It already has your organizations on there and locations, but we're going to add in like a little bit about your organization and then have the photo there. And if you have any questions, here is my contact information. But please, if you have just a second, share out maybe something that went well or something that could be improved. I really appreciate you all. I look forward to working with you all more. And I got a question about the slides. Yes, we will be sending out. Would you like the slides separately from the presentation? Because you'll basically see it, the slides, as well as having the audio on top, or would you like them separate? Okay, I'll send both. I'll send the recording and the slides. You all were fantastic. Thank you, Claudia, for sharing out that example. And you all are definitely free to step out early and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Ms. Danielle. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. And I'll stay on for a little bit in case anyone has a question.
Yeah, actually I do. Danielle, can you talk just a little bit more about the committee?
About what?
The committee that that you shared. I don't know what community it was, but you said they established a committee. Like
the Friends of Wilson Park? Yeah. So I've just become more privy to that. I've actually heard of it before, but never knew what it was. But Marisa mentioned in the past or not in the past, but in Philadelphia that they have, that's where she's located, they have a lot of Friends of. So it'll just be a committee or a group. I'm not sure if funds are a part of it, like if you have to pay a membership, I don't know that. But elected officials, community organizations, anyone who really just wants to see the park thrive, they are a part of this group. So I could almost see it as like your partner coalition really flowing into and forming into a Friends of when you're finished.
And then they actually report to like a county board of supervisor
I'm not sure of that. I will look into that and let you know.
Okay. And then what do you need by tomorrow? I'm sorry, I was typing away.
The 2 to 3 sentences about your project. And if you sent a photo already, but want to send another photo, that would be, you can also send that by tomorrow. And then we'll have it up. I'll send the link for you guys so that you guys can start sharing it and using it as well.
Got it. Will do, ma'am. Thank
you.
you.
I'm still here if anyone has any questions. All right, ending the call. Have a great day.